Hey, this is Chris Velasco with Engadget, and today is a pretty big day if you're a music fan. That's because Apple just launched, after much fanfare and anticipation, Apple Music, which is a streaming music service that sort of ties into the music app and the library that already exists on your phone. It's really interesting in that it sort of combines a traditional streaming music service with a bunch of extra features and the music library that already exists on your phone. So let's take a further look. So right when you fire up the app for the first time, Apple wants to know a bit more about you. So you're taken through a setup process that's very, very reminiscent of Beats music. So you'll be setting up the genres and the artists that you prefer. Once all of that's in place, you'll be dropped into the For You panel, which basically takes all of those recommendations and all the information Apple has just sort of figured out about you and recommends albums and playlists for you to take a look at. Mine, for example, include an indie rock adrenaline boost, Vampire Weekend, and Intro to Muse, which, trust me, I do not need. It's actually a very visually intense part of the app. It's kind of odd considering Apple generally doesn't like to throw in this much information into one view. Everything's arranged in a grid, and it's just kind of a lot to go through. It can be a bit intimidating if you're not really used to this sort of thing. So we've got Intro to Daft Punk, which I don't need. But it does have some of the best hits as defined by one of Apple's curators. And then you've got sort of albums mixed into things as well. So I really like Capital Cities, I'm going to like that. Now obviously you're not going to like everything that comes up in your recommendations, so I don't know who Audion is. So if you press and hold, which is also sort of new to Apple, you can hit recommend less like this, and that just sort of removes it from the flow. So I've already had to do that to a couple Madonna playlists. Don't ask why, I have no idea where they came up. Quite a talented artist though. Moving over into the new section, the name really says it all. That's where you're going to find the recommended new and recent additions to the Apple library. Curiously enough, it's also where all of the playlists live. So if you've been following the Apple Music story, Apple employs a team of actual human curators to create playlists based off of genres and activities, just to kind of give you something that you can't get on a competing service. It sounds like a big deal, I would argue that it is, so it's a little surprising to see them buried halfway down the new view, the new page. You would think something like this would deserve much more attention, and hopefully that gets fixed. I'm not entirely sure why they went that route. The biggest addition to the mix is probably Beats One Radio, which exists in a radio tab all its own. If you're a fan of the old school approach to radio, where you just sort of picked a genre and Apple would play things for you sort of at random, you can still do that, but Beats One is really where Apple has put all of their money and time and effort. I'm generally not a huge fan of that radio format, but Zane Lowe and his team have done a pretty good job of putting together a playlist of things that I actually like. And to top it all off, you're actually able to save tracks you hear on Beats One directly into your Apple Music library, so that's quite a plus. The one big thing that really gets me going is they'll pepper in these little bits of audio branding. I think they're called stings into songs as they're playing, and it's the most obnoxious thing. I know I'm listening to Beats Radio, I don't need the reminder, please make it stop. It does work surprisingly well. DJ Zane Lowe kicked off the broadcast date earlier today at noon, and there were only a few hiccups, a couple glitches in the stream, and once or twice I was just not able to load it at all. So it's still early days for the service, and considering the fact that everybody and their mother upgraded to iOS 8.4 today to get Apple Music, it's maybe not a surprise to see the servers kind of get a little flaky on us. Speaking of things that probably should stop, next to radio is what Apple calls Connect. And it's sort of a social network that's meant for artists and musicians to communicate one way to their fans. It has a lot of potential, and I'm very curious to see how it plays out, but at this point, it's really not much more than Instagram for celebrities that you can sometimes watch music videos on. I'm following about 126 artists because I have 126 artists in my Apple Music library, and you follow them by default. Only about 7 or 8 of them have posted anything to coincide with the Connect/Apple Music launch, and they're mostly just photos and links to merch. So things I could do without, things I think most people could do without, and I don't think Apple has really nailed down what they want the Connect experience to be. Lastly, you've got My Music, which is where your music obviously lives. This is going to encompass all of the music that you've purchased from iTunes, that you've uploaded from your computer, and all of the tracks that you've saved as part of Apple Music's sort of streaming package. It does work really nicely. I will say the design leaves a bit to be desired, and I'll tell you why. It's a bit cramped, which is sort of surprising for Apple. If you take a look, the top 3 most recent tracks that you've added to the library now sit at the top of your library list with album art, so that takes up space. Fonts are smaller, everything feels a bit more squeezed together, and when you play a song, it doesn't bring up the sort of full-page song view like you might be used to. It just sort of starts playing in a mini player at the bottom of the screen. So if you try to pause it, it's a pretty small target to hit on a regular basis. Now I get why Apple had to do this. The 4U, the radio, the Connect, all of those live in the tabs along the bottom row that used to be dedicated to album and now playing and playlists. Now those controls have been shoved into one section of the app, and it works, but man, I wish they'd cooked up something just a bit more elegant. Really, it's that lack of elegance that sums up Apple Music on day one. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and honestly, most of it works fine. I guess it's just that I've come to expect more finesse, more poise from an Apple product than I'm seeing in Apple Music. Do I think this is going to change their fortunes? Absolutely not. Just by virtue of the fact that Apple Music will appear on your phone one day, it's going to do really well. There is also the fact that it does pack in enough features that you'll find in competing services that ostensibly you could look at it as a one-stop shop. You never really need to try out other services if Apple Music is your first. We'll dig into things a bit more in our full review, but I really hope Apple manages to figure out what it wants to do, because I'm not convinced it does just yet.